Imagine cheering wildly for your greatest hero, your voice blending with thousands of others in an electrifying arena. Then, in one shocking moment, everything you believe in shatters. The hero you trusted, adored, and celebrated suddenly turns his back, aligning himself with the very evil he promised to fight. This is the unforgettable story of how The Rock, WWE's People's Champion, became the infamous corporate champion. In the year 1998, World Wrestling Federation, now known as WWE, was reaching one of its most intense and transformative periods. It was the height of what fans now call the Attitude Era. The storylines were more aggressive, the characters more rebellious, and the fan base more involved than ever before. At the center of this cultural shift stood a man who, just 2 years earlier, had been one of the most rejected figures in wrestling, but by now, he had become one of the most beloved. His name was Dwayne Johnson, but the world knew him by another name, The Rock. His journey to becoming the People's Champion was not straightforward. When he debuted in 1996 as Rocky Maivia, the character was designed as a smiling, honorable babyface, a third-generation wrestler meant to be a symbol of legacy. But the audience saw something else. They rejected him, loudly, mercilessly. The chants of "Die, Rocky, D" were not just boos, they were a message. The fans didn't want someone they saw as corporate manufactured. They wanted authenticity. It was a painful introduction to the world of professional wrestling. But instead of crumbling, Dwayne Johnson transformed. By the end of 1997, Rocky Maivia was gone. In his place stood a new persona, one with confidence, arrogance, and an undeniable command of the microphone. He became simply The Rock. He joined the Nation of Domination, a controversial heel faction, and used that platform to sharpen his skills. Slowly, the crowd's hatred turned into fascination, and then admiration. By mid-1998, The Rock had fully separated himself from the nation. He began carving out an identity of his own, one that connected deeply with fans. Even as he insulted them or made fun of their hometowns, his words were sharp, his promos were theatrical, but most importantly, they were effective. People listened, people laughed, people responded. The nickname, the People's Champion, was not officially assigned by WWE management. It was something The Rock began to say himself, at first as a boast, then as a challenge to others in the locker room. But over time, it started to feel accurate. The crowd, the very same crowd that once jeered his every word, now chanted his name. What made The Rock unique in this role was not just his charisma. It was his ability to walk a line between rebellion and entertainment. He wasn't as openly anti-authority as Stone Cold Steve Austin. He didn't lead factions like Triple H and D-Generation X. Instead, The Rock existed in his own category, stylish, loud, unpredictable. He mocked Vince McMahon openly during interviews. He delivered long, theatrical speeches filled with catchphrases that became pop culture staples. He introduced phrases like "layeth the smackdown" and "know your role," and each one became a line the audience could chant along with, despite his heel origins. By late 1998, The Rock had become a face in all but title. He was cheered in arenas across the country. Merchandise with his slogans sold out regularly. Kids wore "Just Bring It" t-shirts to school. Adults quoted him in offices and bars. Wrestling websites and dirt sheets began referring to him as the breakout star of the year. And yet, beneath all this success, there were cracks forming. Because as popular as he was with the crowd, And as much as he had earned his position on his own terms, The Rock was still part of a company run by Vince McMahon. And Vince, as history would later show, did not like losing control over any of his stars. In interviews and commentary, Vince would occasionally compliment The Rock's talent, but he rarely did so without adding a reminder that The Rock was, in his eyes, still part of the WWF machine, still an employee, still someone who could be directed, positioned, or even replaced if necessary. At this point in 1998, The Rock was seen as the ideal blend of everything fans loved. He had the rebellious edge of the Attitude Era, but he also had the athleticism, mic skills, and charm to cross into mainstream media. He was featured in television spots, awarded championship opportunities, and placed at the center of key storylines. To many fans, it looked like The Rock was on a rocket ride toward permanent babyface status, perhaps even the one to carry the company forward as the next great hero after Austin. But something darker was forming behind the scenes. The Rock had earned the love of the people, but Vince McMahon didn't like it when someone had too much power that didn't come from him. The seeds of what would become one of the most shocking heel turns in wrestling history were already being planted. For now, though, The Rock was adored. Crowds chanted his name, signs flooded arenas, cameras zoomed in on fans screaming his catchphrases with joy. He was, in every visible sense, the people's champion. And yet, in a matter of weeks, everything would change. Because loyalty in the world of professional wrestling is never guaranteed, and the higher a man climbs, the more people he inspires, the harder the fall when he betrays them. To understand The Rock's transformation in 1998, we must first understand the man who orchestrated it, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. In the world of professional wrestling, few names carry as much weight. Vince McMahon was not just the chairman of the World Wrestling Federation. He was the architect behind its rise, its success, and many of its darkest moments. By 1998, Vince McMahon was no longer a silent executive working behind the curtain. He had become a character, loud, vindictive, manipulative, and, most of all, obsessed with power. He wore tailored suits, spoke in sharp commands, and walked with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. And in many ways, it did. He controlled the stories, the titles, the camera angles, and even the careers of those who stepped into his ring. But Vince McMahon wanted more than ratings. He wanted control over the image and loyalty of every superstar under his banner. To him, talent was a commodity valuable only if it could be controlled. And if someone became too popular on their own terms, without his approval or orchestration, that was a problem. And so, by the late 1990s, Vince McMahon had shifted from being merely a promoter to a powerful on-screen villain, a tyrant whose mission was to dominate not only the wrestling industry, but the very minds of the audience watching at home. This transformation wasn't accidental. It began with his feud against Stone Cold Steve Austin, the beer-drinking, authority-hating antihero who personified rebellion. Austin refused to obey. He attacked McMahon on live television. He humiliated him repeatedly. And every time he did, the fans exploded with joy. The conflict between Vince and Austin became one of the most iconic rivalries in wrestling history. It was more than entertainment. It was symbolic. The billionaire boss versus the working-class renegade. Order versus chaos. Control versus freedom. And week after week, Vince McMahon lost, not in business, but in perception, because the crowd wasn't cheering for him, They were cheering for rebellion. They were cheering for the downfall of the very system he built. And Vince hated it. Privately, McMahon understood that fan loyalty was a powerful thing. He knew that whoever the audience loved, they would follow, and in 1998, while Austin reigned supreme as the symbol of defiance, another name had begun rising fast: The Rock. At first, The Rock's popularity was useful to Vince. It gave the company a second top-tier star. It balanced out the show's main events. But soon, it became clear that The Rock was more than just a supporting act. He was selling out arenas. He was commanding fan reactions. He was becoming a face of the company, and he wasn't doing it through Vince McMahon's blessing. To a man obsessed with narrative control, this was unacceptable. Vince McMahon didn't create The Rock's fan base. The fans did, and that meant The Rock was dangerous. As Vince's on-screen persona grew more authoritarian, so did his real-world actions. He surrounded himself with loyal followers, corporate yes-men like Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson, bodyguards like the Big Boss Man, and enforcers like Shane McMahon, his own son. They weren't just characters. They were extensions of Vince's will. Together, they made up what fans called the Corporation, a faction designed to protect McMahon's interests and punish those who defied him. To the viewing audience, Vince was the embodiment of corporate greed. He interfered in matches. He changed rules at the last minute. He stripped titles and handed them to his allies. He punished wrestlers who earned their success through merit, rather than obedience. But Vince's greatest strength was not in what he said or did publicly. It was in the plans he made quietly, long before the audience suspected anything. He didn't just want to stop the rise of independent-minded stars. He wanted to take the very symbols of rebellion and corrupt them. He wanted to make heroes into villains. He wanted to prove that no matter how popular someone was, no matter how loudly the crowd cheered in the end, Vince McMahon still had the power to break them. And so, he turned his attention to The Rock. At first, it was subtle. The corporation never attacked The Rock the same way they attacked others. Vince kept his distance. While allowing The Rock to climb the ranks, he observed the crowd reactions. He watched the merchandising numbers. He studied the timing. He waited. Because Vince knew that the higher a star rises, the more devastating it is when they fall. The fans had embraced The Rock as their own. They had made him the people's champion. But Vince saw something different. He saw a future corporate champion. The genius of Vince McMahon's manipulation is that he never made his plans obvious. He didn't need to confront The Rock. He simply created the right situation. And that situation would come at the Survivor Series, a one-night tournament to crown a new WWF champion. On the surface, it seemed fair. A bracket system, multiple superstars. The winner would be whoever fought the hardest. But behind the scenes, the tournament was something else entirely. It was a setup, a stage, a carefully constructed trap designed to manipulate fans' expectations, play on their loyalty, and deliver a shocking outcome. And at the center of it all was Vince McMahon's belief that he could rewrite the narrative, that he could turn cheers into boos, that he could take the people's champion and make him his puppet. At this point in the story, The Rock had no visible alignment with Vince McMahon. He was still mocking the corporation, still portraying himself as a man of the people, and the fans believed him. But Vince was watching and waiting, because in Vince McMahon's world, loyalty is a tool, and power always finds a way to reshape perception. What happened next at the Survivor Series tournament would mark one of the most shocking betrayals in wrestling history. And it would prove, once and for all, that Vince McMahon didn't just run a wrestling company, he ran a machine. one that could twist heroes into villains and make the crowd question everything they once believed. On the 15th of November, 1998, the World Wrestling Federation presented the annual Survivor Series pay-per-view, but this time, it would not be a traditional Survivor Series event. There would be no elimination tag team matches, no gimmick battles, no alliances of convenience. Instead, this edition was named Deadly Game, a one-night, 16-man, single elimination tournament to crown a new WWF champion. On the surface, it seemed simple. A championship had been vacated, and the company needed a new title holder. 16 superstars. 4 rounds. 1 winner. But beneath the surface, something more intricate was taking place. The tournament was not just a way to crown a new champion. It was a stage for manipulation. A battlefield shaped not only by skill, but by deception. And at the heart of it all stood Vince McMahon quietly constructing a plan that no one, not even the fans, saw coming. In the weeks leading up to the event, Vince McMahon and his associates publicly claimed they wanted nothing to do with The Rock. They labeled him disrespectful, arrogant, unworthy of corporate recognition. Their focus, instead, appeared to be on another man, Mankind. The strange, unpredictable, loyal underdog character, played by Mick Foley, had become a favorite of the McMahons. They treated him like a son. They offered him kindness, praise, even friendship. To the audience, it seemed clear, Vince McMahon's chosen one, the man he wanted to crown as champion, was Mankind. Meanwhile, The Rock had to claw his way into the tournament. He was placed in a tough opening bracket. The odds appeared stacked against him. The storyline narrative was that Vince did not want The Rock to win, that Vince feared The Rock would become too powerful, that the corporation was actively working against him. This narrative was intentional. It was designed to lull the audience into comfort, to convince them that The Rock was still their guy, still the outsider, still the one fighting against the machine. And the fans believed it. As the tournament began, The Rock faced off in a series of matches that showcased both his talent and his endurance. In the first round, he was scheduled to face Triple H, but Triple H was ruled out due to injury. In his place came the Big Boss Man, a corporation enforcer sent in seemingly to deliver punishment. But The Rock won in under 10 seconds. The fans erupted. In round 2, The Rock faced Ken Shamrock, a brutal, unrelenting fighter who had aligned himself with the corporation. The match was intense. It tested The Rock's stamina, his ring awareness, and his will to win. After a hard-fought battle, The Rock emerged victorious once again. He was advancing quickly, overcoming opponents tied to the corporation at every step. And with every win, the crowd's belief in him grew stronger. This wasn't just a tournament. This was destiny. In the semifinals, The Rock faced The Undertaker, a dark, ominous figure with a long legacy of dominance. The match was slow, brutal, and psychological. Every move by The Undertaker carried weight. Every reversal by The Rock brought the crowd to their feet. Interference and chaos followed. Kane, Undertaker's brother, appeared. Disqualification ensuite. The match ended in a technicality, but The Rock moved forward. He had survived the dead man, and now only one man stood in his way. Mankind, the man favored by Vince McMahon, the man who had received sympathy, attention, and seemingly every advantage from the corporation. The crowd was fully behind The Rock. They believed this was the final test. One more victory, and the People's Champion would hold the gold. One more step, and he would finally stand as the true face of the company, not by corporate appointment, but by the will of the people. As the final match began, the tension in the arena was palpable. Mankind entered first, awkward and lovable. Wearing his signature mask and shirt and tie combination, The Rock followed, more focused than ever, his face locked in determination. The bell rang. The match began. It was physical from the start. Both men traded heavy blows. The Rock moved with speed and aggression. Mankind absorbed punishment and retaliated with unpredictable offense. Steel chairs were introduced. Tables were broken. The referee was knocked down. Chaos reigned. Then, in the midst of the confusion, The Rock locked Mankind into the sharpshooter, a move made famous by Bret Hart, who had himself been betrayed by McMahon 1 year earlier in the infamous Montreal Screwjob. And as The Rock held the hold, Mankind did not submit, but Vince McMahon, standing at ringside, demanded the bell be rung. The timekeeper obeyed. The match was declared over. The Rock was named the new WWF champion, and in that moment, everything changed. The Rock stood up, seemingly confused at first. Then he turned and extended his hand to Vince McMahon. The arena fell into stunned silence. And then boos. Loud, furious, immediate. The People's Champion had shaken hands with the devil. The man the crowd had trusted had sold them out. The story they thought they knew of a hero rising through adversity, of an underdog defeating the odds, had been a carefully constructed lie. The Rock had never been fighting against the corporation. He had been working with them all along. Vince McMahon stepped into the ring. Laughing, Shane McMahon followed. Clapping. Together, they raised The Rock's arms. The corporation had a new centerpiece, young, talented, powerful, and now, under their control. Mankind, dazed and humiliated, was thrown out of the ring like trash. The betrayal was complete, and the audience, once so united behind The Rock, now looked on in disbelief and anger. For those watching at home, it was one of the most shocking turns in wrestling history. Not because a hero had become a villain that had happened before, but because of how carefully the turn was hidden, because of how deeply the audience had invested in the idea of The Rock as their champion, because it felt like real betrayal. By the time the broadcast ended, the story had already changed. The People's Champion was dead. In his place stood the corporate champion. And the war between Vince McMahon and the audience had entered a new phase one, where their chosen hero had joined the enemy. The seeds had been planted weeks before. And now, they had bloomed into betrayal. The final match of the Deadly Game tournament was over. Or at least, that's what the fans were told. The moment Vince McMahon ordered the timekeeper to ring the bell, even though Mankind had not submitted, confusion rippled across the arena. Some fans stood frozen. Others looked around, expecting the match to restart. But what happened next erased all doubt. As Mankind lay on the mat, still in disbelief, The Rock stood up, calm, composed, and then, slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand to Vince McMahon, the man who had mocked the corporation for months, the man who had called himself the People's Champion, the man the audience had followed through every round of the tournament, was now standing side by side with the very authority he had seemingly opposed. Vince McMahon stepped forward. Smiling, Shane followed. The handshake was firm, calculated, public, And just like that, the illusion shattered. The Rock had betrayed the fans. At first, the audience inside the Kiel Center didn't know how to respond. They had spent the entire night rooting for him through every round, through every chair shot, through every close count. Now, they were forced to reconcile with a reality they hadn't seen coming. Some fans began to boo. Others threw trash into the ring. The chants of "Rocky, Rocky" that had once echoed in unison turned into a chorus of angry, scattered voices. Trust, once earned over months of shared belief, was broken in a matter of seconds. In the ring, Vince McMahon grabbed a microphone. He didn't explain. He gloated. He declared The Rock, the new corporate champion, a man of intelligence, of class, of respect. He mocked mankind for believing he was ever truly accepted. Vince revealed it had all been a ruse, the praise, the support, the affection. It was never real. The tournament had never been fair. The outcome had been decided long before the first bell rang. It was a setup. And the fans? They had played their role perfectly, believing in a story written to deceive them. Mankind, stumbling to his feet, looked around in confusion. He hadn't tapped out. He hadn't submitted. And yet, he had lost. He approached Vince McMahon, demanding answers. Instead, he received a slap and a swift beating from The Rock, the same Rock who had once shared respect backstage with Mick Foley, the same Rock who had once claimed to fight for honor. Now, he stood over mankind's broken body, holding the championship belt above his head. No remorse, no hesitation. This moment was designed for maximum impact. It mirrored the infamous events of 1 year earlier, the Montreal Screwjob, where Bret Hart had been double-crossed by McMahon in a championship match. By echoing that controversial finish, this time with a different victim, and a new chosen champion, Vince McMahon had once again reminded the world that he, not the fans, decided the future of the WWF. And The Rock? He had chosen to be on the winning side. From that night forward, The Rock was no longer referred to as the People's Champion. In every match, in every promo, in every appearance, Vince McMahon stood by his side. He introduced The Rock as the corporate champion, the official face of the WWF. Gone were the silk shirts and sunglasses. Now, The Rock wore suits. He spoke not as a man of the people, but as a man above them. His voice, once filled with playful arrogance, was now filled with cold disdain. He called fans ignorant, ungrateful, weak, and yet there was a strange calm in the way he did it, as if he believed he had made the rational choice, the smarter choice. In interviews, The Rock justified his actions. He said the fans never truly appreciated him. He reminded them of the chants "Die, Rocky, D." He reminded them of the years he spent being booed. He told them he didn't need their love because now he had something better. Hit power, protection, and championship gold. The shift wasn't just in character. It was cultural. Because The Rock's turn wasn't simply about becoming a villain. It was about betrayal. The crowd hadn't just liked him, they had believed in him. They had defended him against other wrestlers. They had bought his shirts, memorized his lines, and chanted his name night after night. And now, they were told it was all for nothing. For Vince McMahon, it was a masterstroke. He had taken the people's favorite, someone they had claimed as their own, and turned him into a symbol of corporate dominance. The message was clear. No one was safe from the system. Even your hero. Even your champion. Even The Rock. In the weeks following Survivor Series, The Rock appeared on Raw is War to thunderous cheers. Crowds, who once screamed in joy, now screamed in protest. Signs that had once read Rocky IV Champ now said Rock sold out. End quote. Fans who had waited in lines to see him now booed as loud as they could. But The Rock didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. In fact, he leaned into the hate. He told the audience that their opinions didn't matter, that their cheers were irrelevant, that he had found something more valuable than their approval. He had found victory. And for a while, it worked. The Rock defended his title under the corporation's protection. Every opponent was carefully chosen, every match structured to his advantage. He cut promos that ridiculed the audience and belittled his challengers. He posed with Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon. He appeared in suits, surrounded by security, escorted to the ring like royalty. But even as he smiled, even as he raised the championship belt, there was a tension building, a quiet unease beneath the surface. Because The Rock, deep down, was not like the others. He wasn't a pawn. And soon, the cost of this alliance, the cost of betraying everything he once stood for, would begin to show. But for now, the message was clear. The people had lost their champion, and in his place stood a man who chose power over principle, a man who had sold out, not in silence, but on the grandest stage of all, before a crowd of thousands, with the entire world watching. The moment The Rock shook Vince McMahon's hand, the air inside the Kiel Center changed. It wasn't just the sound of boos that marked the betrayal. It was the feeling sharp, sudden, and undeniable. Something sacred had been broken. And over the following hours, days, and weeks, the reaction to The Rock's betrayal would grow into a wave of backlash, unlike anything the WWF had seen in years. In arenas across the country, signs that once praised The Rock were replaced with messages of anger. Crowds that once shouted his name in adoration now hurled it like an accusation. Rocky sold out. And doesn't sex. Corporate puppet. And doesn't sex. Traitor to the people. And doesn't sex. Fans brought their old Rocky merchandise to shows, not to wear, but to burn, tear apart, or hold up with words written in black marker, "Never again." The audience felt betrayed, not just as viewers, but as partners in the journey, because they had invested in The Rock emotionally. They had watched him rise. They had stood with him as he defied the system. And now, they felt like fools for believing. Online message boards and early wrestling fan forums exploded with discussion. Some called it the greatest heel turn in years. Others were genuinely furious, unsure whether it was real or scripted. In the late 1990s, the line between story and reality in wrestling was thinner than ever. Fans didn't just watch the product, they analyzed it. They debated every segment. They followed dirt sheets, newsletters, and rumors from backstage. And now, all of them were focused on one question. Why did The Rock do it? Wrestling media outlets ran headlines like, "The People's Champion no more. Rock aligns with the devil. WWF's master manipulation at Survivor Series." Talk shows that rarely discussed wrestling now featured clips of the infamous handshake. Sports radio hosts debated whether this betrayal could rival the real-world infamy of the Montreal Screwjob 1 year earlier. To casual viewers, it was a surprising plot twist. To die-hard fans, it was personal. And for the WWF, the reaction was both a triumph and a challenge. From a storytelling perspective, the heel turn was a success. The twist had shocked the world. The corporation now had a compelling new villain, one who had previously been untouchable. But with that success came volatility. Because The Rock wasn't just another bad guy now. He was the bad guy. The one fans had trusted. And in professional wrestling, few things are more dangerous than a fan base that feels betrayed. At live shows, the reaction became visceral. When The Rock's music hit, the arena shook with booing. Not playful jeers, not theatrical audience engagement. These were real. Angry. Personal. Fans cursed him as he walked to the ring. Some threw trash toward the aisle. Security had to tighten in certain cities where fan behavior grew more aggressive. And through it all, The Rock did not flinch. He didn't try to win them back. He didn't apologize. He embraced the hate. He leaned into the character of the corporate champion. On Raw is War the next night. The Rock stood in the center of the ring in a full suit. Vince and Shane flanked him. The championship belt was draped across his shoulder, and the microphone was in his hand. What followed was a speech that erased any remaining doubt. He mocked the fans. He reminded them of the days when they told him to go away. He told them they never loved him. They only loved what he could do for them. And now, he no longer needed them. He called himself the crown jewel of the corporation. And he said he had traded in the lies of the people for the truth of power. And as the crowd screamed in protest, The Rock just smiled. Cold, confident, calculated. It was one of the most defining promos of his career. Not just because of what he said, but because of how sure he was. He no longer raised his eyebrow to make the crowd cheer. He did it to mock them. The catchphrases remained, but now they were tools of contempt. Not connection. Backstage, even some wrestlers reportedly expressed surprise at how smoothly The Rock transitioned into his new role. He was methodical, unshaken, and if there was guilt, he didn't show it. Some wondered whether he had always been this calculating and whether the people's champion persona had ever been genuine. But in truth, The Rock was doing exactly what made him great, adapting. And whether fans loved him or hated him, they were watching for weeks. The Backlash continued. Matches with beloved stars like Mankind, X-Pac, and even Stone Cold Steve Austin were booked to maximize hatred. The Rock cheated constantly. He used the corporation for protection. He insulted hometowns, legends, and even former allies. But behind the scenes, the WWF had accomplished what it needed: attention, headlines, heat, and most of all, money. Because hate, when it's this strong, sells. And yet even amid all the success, a question lingered. Could this version of The Rock last? Could he maintain this level of calculated cruelty indefinitely? Or was there still a part of him, deep beneath the suit and the smug smile, that remembered what it was like to fight for something bigger than himself? That question would take time to answer. For now, the damage was done. The Rock had burned the bridge behind him. And the crowd, once his greatest ally, now stood as his fiercest enemy. After Survivor Series, The Rock entered a new chapter of his career, one defined by control, success, and security. He was no longer just another rising star. He was the face of the corporation. And he was now officially and unapologetically the WWF champion. For Vince McMahon, the plan had worked perfectly. The most electrifying man in sports entertainment now stood under his banner. The belt, the image, the spotlight, it all belonged to The Rock. But there was a cost. In the weeks that followed, The Rock's appearance changed. He replaced his colorful shirts with sharp black suits. The sunglasses remained, but the smile behind them was different, less playful, more guarded. He began walking to the ring, flanked by security. No longer surrounded by fans, now surrounded by walls. Where once he soaked in cheers, now he was met with a storm of boos, and yet he never broke stride. He carried himself like a man above the noise, above the people. And that's exactly how the corporation wanted it. The privileges of being the corporate champion were undeniable. First-class travel, VIP treatment, protected title reigns, matches that ended in disqualifications, run-ins, or carefully scripted victories. Opponents who got too close to winning were suddenly ambushed by corporation members like Big Boss Man or Shane McMahon. Pay-per-views became predictable. The Rock would win, Vince would smirk, and the fans would boo. But the corporation didn't care about the reaction. They cared about the outcome, and The Rock, week after week, delivered the outcome they wanted. Behind the scenes, Vince McMahon sang his praises. He called The Rock the future of this company. And he ensured The Rock appeared in media interviews, promotional events, and front-page advertisements. The WWF had their champion, and they wanted the world to see him, but the man holding the belt wasn't smiling like he used to. And slowly, cracks began to form. The Rock had always been a performer who thrived on connection, even when he played the villain. He read the crowd. He responded to them. But now, that connection was severed. He wasn't getting reactions of admiration. He was getting venom. And while he pretended not to care, the absence of love left a silence that was hard to ignore. In hotel rooms between shows, The Rock often sat alone. He watched recordings of his matches. He studied crowd reactions. He read fan signs, the ones calling him a traitor. Sometimes, he laughed it off. Other times, he didn't, because deep down, The Rock knew he had sacrificed something more important than titles: trust. At live events, he maintained his role perfectly. He insulted the crowd with sharp, cutting promos. He mocked the legacy of past champions. He dismissed the chants of Rocky sucks as meaningless. And yet, in moments when the cameras weren't rolling in the walks backstage, in the silence after a match, there was a different energy in him. One of distance, of reflection, of isolation. The corporation praised him publicly, but they used him strategically. Vince McMahon saw The Rock as an asset, not a partner. Someone to represent the brand, but not someone to lead it independently. And as time went on, The Rock began to notice something. The very same system that had once tried to break him was now shaping him, controlling him. And somewhere inside, the man who once called himself the people's champion began to wonder, had he become exactly what he used to fight against? Outside the ring, the media continued to follow his rise. He was featured in magazines. He was interviewed on television shows. He was praised for his look, his confidence, his marketability. But the interviews were different now. The questions focused on money, on power, on the corporation. No one asked about the fans anymore. No one asked about his connection with the people. And slowly, The Rock stopped bringing them up. The locker room, too, began to shift. Some wrestlers looked at him with quiet respect. He was champion. After all, others looked at him with caution, unsure if the man in the suit was still the same person who used to joke backstage. And a few, like Stone Cold Steve Austin, saw right through the transformation. They didn't see evolution. They saw betrayal. The Rock's days were filled with victories, but they were hollow. The matches no longer felt earned. The cheers no longer existed. The belts, the suits, the limousines, they were all symbols of status, but not fulfillment. And in the silence between matches, when the lights went out and the crowd had gone home, The Rock often stood alone in the ring, holding a championship that seemed to weigh more with each passing week. Because power, once gained, has its own price. It offers security, but it also builds walls. And the higher The Rock climbed within the corporation, the further he drifted from the very thing that made him great, the people. In early 1999, the World Wrestling Federation had reached a boiling point. The fans were louder, the characters were bolder, the storylines more volatile, and at the center of it all stood two titans. On one side, The Rock, the corporate champion, protected by Vince McMahon, dressed in tailored suits, holding the most coveted prize in professional wrestling. On the other, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the anti-hero of a generation, foul-mouthed, beer-drinking, and unafraid to flip off the system he refused to obey. Their paths were destined to collide, and that collision would take place on the biggest stage of them all, WrestleMania 15. The build-up to the match was electric. The tension wasn't just between two superstars. It was between two ideologies. The Rock, once loved by the people, now stood as a symbol of corporate power. He didn't just hold the championship, he represented the system, cold, calculated, backed by Vince McMahon and his army of enforcers. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the complete opposite. He didn't care about suits, about sponsors, or about corporate alliances. He was chaos wrapped in leather boots. He represented rebellion, not the romantic kind, but the gritty, bloody, bear-soaked kind. To the fans, this was more than a title match. It was a war. Every week on Raw, the conflict escalated. The Rock delivered slick promos mocking Austin's lack of sophistication. Austin responded with fists, steel chairs, and beer baths. Segments ended in chaos. Parking lots became battlegrounds. The Rock was protected by Vince, but even Vince couldn't shield him forever. Because Austin didn't follow rules, he didn't file complaints. He simply attacked, and with each assault, the crowd grew louder. By the time WrestleMania 15 arrived, the 28th of March, 1999, the atmosphere was unlike anything before. Philadelphia's first Union Center was packed. Signs filled the crowd. Austin 316, Rocky sucks. Down with the corporation. The energy was palpable. This wasn't just a wrestling match. It was a cultural reckoning. The entrances set the tone. Stone Cold walked to the ring first. No fireworks. No theatrics. Just a man on a mission. The Rock followed, with Vince McMahon by his side, soaking in the heat from the crowd, carrying the championship like royalty. As the bell rang, the arena erupted. The match was brutal from the start. There was no feeling out period. No chain wrestling. It was fists, boots, weapon shots. They brawled outside the ring, through the crowd, over the barricades. Steel steps were used as weapons. Tables were shattered. Referees were knocked out. Vince McMahon interfered repeatedly, trying to tilt the match in The Rock's favor. But Austin wouldn't stay down. Time and again, he rose, bloodied, bruised, unrelenting. And then came the final sequence. Austin countered a rock bottom, delivered a stone-cold stunner. The referee crawled into position. 1, 2, 3. The arena exploded. The corporate champion had been defeated, and with that pinfall, Stone Cold reclaimed the WWF Championship. But the moment meant more than a title change. It meant Resistance had won. For one night, the machine had failed. The people had their closure. They had watched their former champion fall, not just to a man, but to a cause. The Rock lay on the mat, motionless. The camera zoomed in. His expression was blank. He had fought hard, taken every shortcut available, used every ally he had, and still, it hadn't been enough. In the following days, questions swirled. Was this the end of The Rock's dominance? Was his alliance with Vince McMahon beginning to crack? Or was this simply a chapter in a longer war? For the fans, Austin's victory was cathartic. But for The Rock, it marked something deeper. A moment of silence, a pause in his rise that forced him to look inward. Because power had failed him. And now, for the first time since Survivor Series, the image of invincibility was gone. After WrestleMania Pitsnime, things changed slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. The Rock had lost the championship, and with that loss came something more dangerous than defeat: doubt. It began backstage, in quiet moments, behind the cameras and away from the crowd. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there, and it was growing. For months, The Rock had stood at the center of the corporation. It had delivered results. He had followed Vince McMahon's orders. He had acted as the perfect corporate champion. But now, without the belt, he began to see things differently. He started to see how quickly the system that once protected him could turn cold. After WrestleMania, Vince McMahon's attention shifted. He no longer paraded The Rock as the crown jewel. Instead, he focused on damage control, on new contenders, on maintaining the corporation's influence. And The Rock? He was still part of the group, but no longer its priority. No longer its centerpiece. In weekly segments on Raw and SmackDown, small signs appeared. The Rock began cutting promos that, while still arrogant, were less aligned with the corporation's messaging. He interrupted Vince mid-sentence. He declined assistance during matches. And more than once, he raised his eyebrow not at his opponents, but at his own allies. To the audience, it looked like character development. But inside the storyline, it was something else. It was rebellion, carefully measured, but undeniable. Vince McMahon noticed. So did Shane. Tension grew during backstage segments. The corporation, once unified, now showed visible cracks. Shane began criticizing The Rock's decisions. Vince made cryptic comments about loyalty. And The Rock, in turn, began showing signs of resentment, because deep down, he knew something he hadn't wanted to admit. He was never the one in control. He was never a partner. He was a pawn. The realization came in pieces. It came when Vince allowed other corporation members to interfere in The Rock's matches without warning or permission. It came when The Rock was passed over for title rematches. It came when younger stars were given airtime while he sat in the background. The corporation no longer needed him to be their figurehead. They had used him, and now they were preparing to replace him. But The Rock was no ordinary superstar. He didn't take betrayal lightly, and he didn't forget. He had once turned on the people. Now, the very machine he turned toward was preparing to discard him. And in that betrayal, something old began to resurface. A spark, a memory, a voice inside that whispered, "You were never meant to serve. You were meant to lead." His promos grew sharper. He stopped thanking Vince. He questioned corporation tactics on live television. In one segment, after a botched interference cost him a match, The Rock refused to accept an apology from Shane McMahon. He walked away without a word. The crowd noticed, and for the first time in months, they cheered, not because he insulted someone, but because they saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, the people's champion. This shift didn't happen overnight. The Rock didn't tear off his suit and declare a revolution. He didn't hug the crowd or beg for forgiveness. No, he did what he always did. He told the story slowly, strategically, and on his own terms, match after match, segment after segment. The audience watched as The Rock began to distance himself from the corporation. He stopped asking for help. He fought alone. He lost clean. But every time he stood up again, the cheers grew louder. Backstage, the corporation grew paranoid. Shane questioned The Rock's loyalty. Vince issued warnings. But The Rock no longer responded to warnings. He looked them in the eye and said nothing, because he knew something they didn't. He knew the people were watching, waiting, hoping. By the summer of 1999, the alliance was fractured. Technically, The Rock was still part of the corporation, but in spirit, he had already walked away. And when the moment came when the betrayal was no longer subtle, it would not be quiet. It would be spectacular, because The Rock had learned a powerful lesson. No one uses The Rock, not Vince McMahon, not the corporation, not anymore. Redemption in the world of professional wrestling doesn't come with apologies. It doesn't come with flowers, or promises, or carefully crafted press releases. It comes with action. It comes with sacrifice. And, more than anything, it comes with time. After months of subtle defiance, The Rock had reached a crossroads. He was no longer the corporate champion. The corporation had shifted its focus elsewhere. And the fans, while still wary, had begun to watch him differently. Not with blind adoration, but with curiosity. Was the man who once betrayed them now trying to find his way back? Redemption did not come all at once. It began in small moments. Like when The Rock refused outside interference during a high-stakes match and fought clean, or when he saved another face wrestler from a backstage ambush and walked away without explanation. There were no smiles, no hugs, no speeches, just choices, and those choices began to shape a new story. In interviews, The Rock didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't address the betrayal directly. Instead, he made subtle references. He talked about mistakes. He talked about learning who to trust. He talked about remembering where he came from. To longtime fans, these were signals, faint but real. A man who had once stood against the people was slowly, but surely, returning to them. His promos changed, in tone. They were still sharp, still filled with wit. But the arrogance began to soften. The mockery shifted from the crowd back to the real enemy, Vince McMahon. And each time he insulted Vince, the fans cheered a little louder. Each time he challenged a corporation member, they leaned forward just a little more. The Rock started to refer to himself again not as the corporate champion, but as the people's champion. At first, the fans booed. They didn't believe it. They remembered what he had done. But The Rock didn't back down. He kept saying it. week after week. And with each use, it sounded a little less like a slogan and more like a mission. He worked harder in the ring. He took more punishment. He lost matches with dignity. And when he won, he did it on his own. No low blows, no run-ins, no corporate backup. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even praised at first. But it was consistent, and the fans noticed. The real turning point came during a televised tag match when The Rock was ambushed mid-match by multiple corporation members. He fought back, but the numbers overwhelmed him. Then, unexpectedly, Mankind ran down to help. The same Mankind who had been betrayed by The Rock at Survivor Series months earlier. The same man The Rock had humiliated with Vince McMahon by his side. Now, he was offering a hand, and The Rock accepted it. They didn't speak afterward. There was no backstage reconciliation. But that moment, that one silent handshake in the middle of the ring was louder than any promo. It told the audience that something had changed. In the following weeks, The Rock and Mankind teamed up more frequently. The odd couple dynamic worked. The fans, slowly, began to laugh again, to cheer again. And when they won the WWF Tag Team Championships together, the crowd erupted. Not just because of the belts, but because of what it symbolized. The Rock was earning trust not by asking for it, but by earning it. The cheers didn't return overnight. Some cities still booed him. Some fans still held up signs that read, "Never forget Survivor Series." But others brought signs that said, "We forgive you, M." And slowly, those signs became more common. One night on Raw, during a solo promo, The Rock paused. He looked around the arena, not with contempt, but with recognition. Then he said, simply, "The Rock knows he turned his back on you. But The Rock's not here to apologize. The Rock is here to earn his way back one match, one night, one beating at a time." It wasn't scripted for redemption. It was delivered like a challenge. And the crowd responded with a roar. Redemption wasn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It was about confronting it and moving forward anyway. The Rock knew he couldn't erase Survivor Series, but he could replace it with moments that mattered, with battles fought honorably, with alliances rebuilt, with the people once again on his side. By the fall of 1999, The Rock had become one of the most beloved figures in WWF again. Not because he returned to who he was, but because he evolved into someone stronger, someone who had walked through betrayal and come back standing. He didn't need Vince McMahon's approval. He didn't need corporate protection. He had the people. And this time, he didn't take them for granted. By the end of 1999, the transformation was nearly complete. The Rock had fought his way back not just to the top of the card, but back into the hearts of the fans. He had taken every beating, he had walked every mile, and he had rebuilt his image without shortcuts. But there was still one loose thread. One man who had once raised his hand in victory and now stood as a symbol of everything The Rock had left behind. Vince McMahon. Their final confrontation was inevitable. It wasn't about titles anymore. It wasn't about alliances. It was about freedom. It was about closure. And it was about proving once and for all that The Rock belonged to no one but the people. The night was set. Vince McMahon, still smug and unrepentant, stood in the ring on Monday Night Raw. Mocking The Rock's redemption arc, he claimed he had made The Rock, that he had turned a mid-card nobody into a global name, that without the corporation, The Rock would have been forgotten. He invited The Rock to come thank him to kiss the ring. One last time. But when The Rock entered the arena, he didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring gratitude. He brought fury. And a microphone. Standing in the center of the ring, The Rock didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke clearly, deliberately. You used The Rock. You turned him against the people. You took the love they gave and twisted it into something cold. But now, The Rock is here to finish this. Not with words. Not with contracts. But with one final beating. And with that, the fight began. It wasn't a scheduled match. It wasn't sanctioned. But the crowd didn't care. This was personal. The Rock chased Vince McMahon around the ring. The suit and tie figure that once stood so tall was now scrambling to escape. Security tried to intervene. Shane McMahon ran down to help. Corporation enforcers tried to surround the ring, but The Rock fought them all. One by one, the audience erupted. Every right hand, every clothesline, every spinebuster, each one louder than the last. And finally, as Vince McMahon lay flat on his back, helpless and exposed, The Rock stood over him. He looked at the fans. They chanted one word: elbow, elbow, elbow. And then, he ran to the ropes, bounced off the far side, posed, and delivered the most emphatic people's elbow of his career. The arena shook. The chant changed. Rocky, Rocky, Rocky. Not with irony, not with sarcasm, but with sincerity. They weren't cheering for a suit. They weren't cheering for a corporation. They were cheering for their champion. Vince McMahon was helped out of the ring, humiliated and broken. And The Rock stood alone. No title belt, no corporate entourage, no catchphrase. Just him and the people. He picked up the microphone again, his voice steady. The Rock is done being used, done being owned. The Rock fights for one thing, and one thing only, and that's the millions. The crowd finished it for him, and millions of The Rock's fans. For the first time in a long time, The Rock smiled not out of arrogance, but out of connection. The bridge had been rebuilt, and this time, it would not break. He raised his eyebrow. He raised his fist. And in that moment, The Rock was no longer the corporate champion. He was, once again, the people's champion. Wrestling, at its heart, has always been about stories. Good versus evil. Loyalty versus power. Truth versus deception. But sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about those who never fall. They're about those who fall hard and find the strength to rise again. The Rock's journey from people's champion to corporate puppet and back again was never just about matches or titles. It was about identity, about what it means to belong not to a company, or a brand, or a billionaire's plan, but to the people. To those who believed, and to those who were betrayed. The betrayal hurt. The fans felt it. The locker room felt it. Even The Rock, in his quiet moments, felt it. But redemption doesn't erase the past. It doesn't pretend betrayal didn't happen. It simply proves that growth is possible, that what you choose next matters more than what you chose before. In turning his back on Vince McMahon, The Rock wasn't just fighting a character. He was breaking free from a system that tried to rewrite who he was. He was reclaiming his story. On his terms. Not every wrestler finds their way back. Not every hero earns a second chance. But The Rock did not, because the fans forgot what he had done. But because they saw how hard he worked to make it right. Night after night. Word by word. Match by match, he reminded the world that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about being accountable and about fighting not just for belts or glory but for the connection that started it all, the love between a performer and the people. In the end, The Rock became more than a superstar. He became a symbol of change, of struggle, of rising from your lowest point not with shame, but with honor. And the truth is this: no one is purely good. No one is purely bad. But everyone has the strength to rise again and rewrite their story. The People's Champion was never just a title. It was a bond. And The Rock, after all the detours, earned it back. The hard way. The only way that ever truly matters.